Some people again, do fasted training because they think it's helpful. Some people avoid it because they think it's harmful. And
what's a better fuel source for performance, carbs or fats? The answer is going to shock you.
If you're fasted, so meaning you wake up and you do some exercise, you will rely more on fat.
In this episode, I speak with Dr. Jeff Rothschild, a registered sports dietitian and researcher who is investigating exactly how much of an impact the food that we eat has on our performance.
If you're in the fed state and in a race, are you going to improve your fat oxidation by doing fasted training?
We cover the physiology of exercise, energy systems, and what food is actually best to optimally fuel your training. This is a great chat, so let's get to it.
I think it comes down to just because you can, doesn't mean you should.
And we are live back for another episode of the Performance That Matters podcast. I have a very, very special guest joining me today, all the way from Auckland, New Zealand. We've got Dr. Jeff Rothschild. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
Now, once you hear Jeff talk, you will very quickly understand that he does not have a Kiwi accent, and it's very obvious he was not raised in the land of fish and chips. Jeff, what brought you over to Auckland?
Yeah, I moved from the US about 5 years ago, just over 5 years ago, to do my PhD, and then finished that a couple of years ago, and then have stayed here working since then.
Yeah, and whereabouts were you based? What were you doing when you were over in the US?
I lived in Los Angeles for about 20 years. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, but then for the last kind of 20 years, I lived in Los Angeles, just working for the past, I suppose, 6 to 10 years is when I lived there as a private practice nutritionist.
Yeah, excellent. And we're talking a little bit off air there, Jeff. You are big interest in endurance sport, which we'll talk about a lot in this episode, but you yourself dabbled quite a bit in endurance sports in past lives.
Yeah. I've done one Ironman, and mostly now just stick to cycling. Ride most days on the trainer now. It seems to be before the little monsters wake up. So when the house is quiet, I can just knock out a little bit of time before like 7:15 a.m. It's pretty mellow in my house.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, you've got a very, very interesting background in your research. Phenomenal. Absolutely have learnt so much reading your research and watching your videos and getting all of your knowledge. Give us a little bit of information. What made you want to move from LA over to Auckland? What was the intention with your studies and research?
Yeah, I had been working in that private practice setting and was certainly interested in research and stayed interested in research after I did my master's. And then I just kind of got to a point where I thought a PhD had passed me by because I was in my late 30s at the time. And then I thought, why not? And so I was looking at PhD programs and looked within the US, but also internationally, and just kind of wanted to find a place that would be a good fit, like a world-class lab, someplace doing great research, someplace where I actually wanted to drive my own PhD topic. So certain labs, certain PhDs, you kind of slot into a existing bigger project, and in other ones, you can kind of create the things you're interested in, and there's some kind of things in between. One's not better than the other, but just kind of better fit for certain people. So I wanted someplace like that, and I wanted a place where the supervisors were really good. And so mine were Dan Blues and Andy Kilding, who I enjoyed their work for quite a while and learned a lot. And so wanted a place, where it's a good place to live, good place to do great work, and it seemed like the right fit.
Yeah, excellent. We'll talk about your research specifically, but can we wind back a little bit, Jeff, and just give a bit more of a broader overview? And can we start, just to set the scene for what we're going to talk about later on in this chat, can we just start talking about the different energy systems when we're exercising? So a lot of the audience are going to be active athletes. They're going to be sports nutritionists who are likely athletes themselves or working with athletes. Let's just give a quick rundown, quick physiology 101. Can you break down what the energy systems are that we are using when we're exercising?
Yeah, no worries. So I guess we can think about three primary energy systems. We have that ATP CP system, or phosphagen or anaerobic alactic system. So that's this immediate energy. So it's like 0 to 10 seconds. So if you just want to stand up right now or jump up on a table, there's energy that's already there, ready to go. But that is, it's short-lived. It gives us these short explosive things. But then after about, let's say 10 seconds to 2 minutes, there's this anaerobic lactic system. We might also here refer to as the glycolytic system. And that breaks down glucose, but without oxygen to produce energy. And if we think about, like a 30-second maximal effort, it's largely this system that's contributing. And then we have the aerobic system. So that's these longer durations. So anything from about 2 minutes onwards, it starts to contribute more and more. So obviously like a 45 or 60-minute run or something is going to be primarily aerobically driven. And that, again, uses oxygen to break down carbohydrate and fat.
And how do these systems interplay with each other, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest way, the nice story that we're taught, and the kind of the figures that we see in these textbooks are that the first 10 seconds is this ATP CP system, and then you have the glycolytic system kicking in, and then the aerobic system. And that's it's easier to wrap our heads around that, and it's certainly not wrong, but that's kind of like when we're resting and then we start exercising. But let's say we're doing something, say it's a round of fighting or a repeated sprint. I mean, that might be true the first time, but then all of a sudden you're recovered, and then maybe after 1 minute you do another, let's say a 30-second interval. All of a sudden these start, the interplay is a little bit different, and it's not as clean as it's it might have been originally taught. So there's kind of all the systems going all the time. Still, this aerobic system is prevailing. But if you think about like a 30-second sprint, but then so it's mostly anaerobic, we could say. But then all of a sudden, even with a 2 or 3 minute recovery, the next one is going to be increasingly aerobic contribution. And then if you do another one, like so it's not as clean as like the first 10 seconds of exercise or 30 seconds of exercise. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And what factors influence how much we use of each of those energy systems?
Well, in terms of how much of each system, it would be recovery. So where our like ATP is that energy currency. So when we start exercising, that ATP, the phosphates get used. We start accumulating ADP and AMP. So kind of that the ratio of those phosphates and the AMP, ADP, ATP, that's dictating what those systems, and then also the intensity that's required. So how much ATP we're kind of asking for. If we're just going along at like a steady jog, it's not a big deal to create all that energy aerobically. But if we're doing, all of a sudden you start doing a full sprint for 10 seconds, then it's going to, the demand is going to be greater. And so your body's going to try to meet that demand with those anaerobic systems. Now, the ability to continue with those high intensity efforts or repeats is kind of contingent upon there's acid-base balance, and there's kind of a lot of these factors that kind of start weaving together. But I think that the good way to think of it is kind of the intensity and kind of the duration is probably the simplest way to think about it. What's dictating that? Yeah,
absolutely. Now we're going to spend a lot of time in this podcast talking about fueling and how different fueling affects exercise performance. Can you talk to us how our body uses different fuel sources during different exercise intensities?
Yeah, I mean, if we just kind of think of it simply in terms of, let's say, low, moderate, and high intensity. So low intensity might be walking or like, easy cycling. And we can rely on a mix of carbohydrate and fat, generally primarily fat oxidation if it's a low enough intensity. So we're using oxygen to break down fat. And this is, again, mostly the aerobic system. As the intensity starts increasing, carbohydrate can contribute an increasing amount. Aerobic metabolism can still be the main process, but we still also have that anaerobic system starting to, think of it as like I like to think of it as a wheel. There's a machine. So at the top, we have carbohydrate, fat. There's a little wheel that spins around and creates energy in the first, the anaerobic system. And then that output of that, so it goes to pyruvate and then goes through the aerobic system. So at low intensity, the wheels are spinning around. Everything is good. As the intensity starts increasing, the wheels have to start spinning faster because the energy demand is greater. So these machines are spinning faster. But all of a sudden, if we start going really fast, let's say above our, let's call anaerobic threshold, or critical power, or critical speed, the demand is outpacing the supply from the aerobic system. So the aerobic system is maxed out. This is, if you're just listening, I mean, it'd be easier to kind of visualize this, but imagine the aerobic system is spinning at maximal capacity, but it's not giving us enough of the energy we're actually after. Then the anaerobic system, the anaerobic system will pick up the slack. That'll create a lot of energy quickly for us, but think of it like a revolving door going to the aerobic system. So the outputs of the anaerobic system, the pyruvate, there's a backlog. So those spill out into our cells and into our blood as lactate. because there's too much. And so that lactate goes along with some hydrogen ions, the pH drops. And so, again, I think if you're a visual person, this is easier to kind of see on paper, but basically, the intensity is really dictating these energy systems.
Yeah, so if we summarize that, Jeff, just quickly, so when we're moving these wheels really slowly, we're getting enough oxygen in, we're below that anaerobic threshold, so we're getting enough of that oxygen in. We can use both those carbohydrates and fats, but we're predominantly going to be using and getting that ATP, that energy molecule that you were talking about, predominantly from our fats. Is that correct?
Yeah, fat and carbohydrate, it kind of depends on our feeding status, which maybe we can kind of come back to, but like if we've eaten or if we're fasted or where our glycogen levels are. But the key thing is that it's all coming from this aerobic system.
Yeah, and you
or
mentioned
largely,
there,
yeah.
and you mentioned there, Jeff, and I think that's important to touch on. Can you explain, just for people who don't know, what is your anaerobic threshold? What is that point? Because it is at that point, right, that you said we start making these waste products and these systems change a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate about the anaerobic threshold, the term, and the exact point. But I think, again, from like a nutritionist and an athlete standpoint, we can think about this as where the demand for energy outpaces the supply that could be made in a sustainable way. So another word for it, for that point, is the maximal metabolic steady state. So basically the highest intensity that you could sustain where everything is kind of going along at steady state, meaning there's not an accumulation of lactate or hydrogen ions or things. So it's the highest sustainable pace. Above that, then you can make that energy, but there's going to be some things that are accumulating. Like again, the hydrogen ions are going to increase, which means your pH is going to decrease, which can lead to fatigue. Lactate will increase. So it's basically this sustainable from non-sustainable. Steady state versus non-steady state threshold.
Could you give us some examples of types of exercise that are common? Let's just say in endurance sports, even specific workouts where we would be, say, in this state where we can be in this steady state where we're getting enough supply to equal demand, and then say some sessions or training that endurance athletes would be doing where that wouldn't be the case?
Yeah. I mean, it can be as simple as any kind of interval session. I mean, if you think about like your hardest 30 minutes, the hardest you could sustain for 30 minutes is around that maximum metabolic steady state. And again, there's differences in how long you can hold that, but let's just say roughly like 30 minutes, you go as hard as you can for 30 minutes. That's kind of like, by definition, you're sustaining that for 30 minutes so you can hang on there. Anything above that power output is going to be, let's say non-sustainable. So it could be like, 6 by 3 minute intervals with 2 or 3 minutes of recovery, doing your best efforts at each one. So you're going to be able to generate higher power for those intervals, and then you take your recovery and so on.
Yeah, excellent. So let's get into the nutrition here, because this is the focus of your PhD. You looked at many different areas, but this is the big focus of it. So you have done research about using different fuels prior to exercise, and you studied using fats, protein, and carbs as pre-workout fuels to set up for these different training sessions. Can you talk to us about that research?
Yeah. A lot of people, either do fasted training or avoid fasted training, and either reasons that they think it's going to help their fat oxidation or it's going to hurt their performance. And there's kind of a lot of contrasting thoughts. One of the first parts of my PhD was a survey of I think it was nearly 2,000 endurance athletes, and basically like the surprising thing was how some people again do fasted training because they think it's helpful. Some people avoid it because they think it's harmful, and I guess context dependent, they both could be right, but sometimes there was so much kind of contrasting viewpoints. So some subsequent research looked at that. So for example, it's pretty well established that if you're fasted, so meaning you wake up and you do some exercise, you will rely more on fat in terms of the fat and carbohydrate ratio than if you had just eaten breakfast. But at high intensities, those differences disappear. So if you're doing something hard, you're going to burn basically this, very similar amount of fat and carbohydrate. So if we're talking about now just an easier workout, there will be a difference. If you have fat and or protein beforehand, so let's just say like some whey protein or some peanut butter or something like that, you will get many of you'll effectively be in the fasted state from this substrate oxidation standpoint. So you'll still burn essentially as much fat as you were during these low intensity workouts as if you were fasted. But there could be some benefit there because then you're not going to be in such a calorie deficit. And some people might just feel hungry or things like that. So there's some potential use there that I think is underutilized. From a performance standpoint, If the session is less than around 90 minutes, so let's just say a 1 hour kind of interval session where let's say you do a warm up and then maybe it's, like I said, 6 by 3 minute intervals or 2 sets of 5 by 3, or something along those lines, that where the total workout is 60 to 75 minutes, somewhere in there, I don't believe performance will be affected at all. So even people say, oh, well, your top end performance you need to be fueled for. That's not what my research has shown, and the other research has shown the same. It's where it matters is when you get longer and harder. So 90 minutes plus. So a long, hard workout. I do believe there's a difference in terms of how well you perform if you're fasted or if you're fed with carbohydrate. But again, for these shorter workouts, it doesn't really matter too much.
Can we dive into that a bit, Jeff? Because what we're saying here is that if you wake up and you complete these high intensity sessions fasted, so first thing in the morning, a lot of guys get up, roll out of bed, and they've got these high intensity sessions. Is there a number you can put on it? Is there, say, I know intensity is very ambiguous, but an intensity score that you can align to this, and then a duration where you can say, hey, if this is the type of session you have, it doesn't make a difference if you're fasted or not?
Yeah, I think it's just really a duration, because the intensity, yeah, anything, let's say 75 minutes or less, I don't think it would really matter. Now, with that said, people might say, well, what about recovery for the next day and things like that? Now, where this can be a problem is when people that have high training volumes and or are very fit, which they usually kind of go together. The reason for that is because someone's burning a lot of calories. So someone who's very fit and also bigger in body size can burn 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 calories in a hard hour, whereas someone who's not very fit or smaller might only burn 500 or 600 calories in an hour. That means that deficit that they're digging for themselves in a fasted workout can be, like I said, double. And then if you couple that up with another workout later in the day, or something like that, you can really get yourself into too big of a deficit. So I think if someone's, let's say, exercising like 7 hours a week or so or less, so basically like if you're doing an hour a day, I don't think it matters. If you're training 20 hours, 25 hours a week, I do think it matters. In that case, I wouldn't suggest getting in such a big deficit. Now, that's where if you did want to do some kind of low carb or fasted training, a breakfast of eggs, avocado, peanut butter, whey protein, those kind of things can be useful for keeping you in that kind of pseudo fasted state, allowing high fat oxidation whilst not creating such a calorie deficit.
And why is it, Jeff, that say someone would want to go into that, say, fasted state to get that fat oxidation? If we're saying, even if they're going in, they want to eat, and you, like your research said, you can have the fat and protein before your workout, and it'll simulate as if you were fasted, you get better fat oxidation. Why is it that that's favorable?
Well, that's debatable. I don't think it really is, actually. I mean, the simple thing is they go, oh, well, I'd burn more fat at the time, and that's good. Well, it's not like it's just, it doesn't matter as much as some people think. Also, it doesn't really seem to change your ability, your long-term fat oxidation. Meaning, like, if you're in the fed state and in a race, are you going to improve your fat oxidation by doing fasted training? It may be. It's actually still a little unclear. And I had one study going during my PhD, but then it got interrupted by COVID and it never got finished, which would have really shed some good light. But I think it's one of those things that people want to lose fat, so they think it would make more sense to burn more fat during exercise, which again, it's kind of hard to argue with the basic logic, except that when we burn more carbs during exercise and we lower our glycogen, like during high intensity exercise, after the workout, we can tend to burn more fat. So, this, you can argue both ways pretty well in terms of should you do fasted training or not from a health standpoint. So yeah, I think it really, my whole PhD or a large part of my PhD was focused on this, and I don't really know. I think it comes down to personal preference.
So just to summarize that and just to come back, because it is a question, right? And I'm sure you get this a million times a day, Jeff, especially if you're talking to newer athletes, right? If we're coming back to these energy systems and we're just looking at and we're going, okay, Jeff's saying that for these longer duration, we're using this aerobic one, we're using a mix of fat and carbs, and then we get more of this ATP, this energy molecule from fat. Wouldn't it make sense then? Isn't that just basic logic that we go, oh, it makes more sense that I'd want to burn more fat or oxidize more fat as energy? But what you're saying is that we just don't seem to see that as beneficial. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, even during, so if someone's doing a long workout, also, this is something people really don't appreciate, is that carbohydrate during exercise doesn't really changes it a little bit, but not that much. It's more like your muscle glycogen, so the carbohydrate storage, that's going to deplete over time. So if you're doing a 2, 3, 4 hour bike ride, even if you blast carbs like 90 grams an hour, you're still going to be burning very high rates. You're going to show very high rates of fat oxidation later in that ride. Slightly lower than if you were completely fasted or had low carbs during, but like you can still like literally 90 grams an hour, and you still can be burning like a ton of fat during exercise, because your muscle glycogen is a key dictator of that ratio of carbon fat.
Yeah, can you just to bring this all together, Jeff, and I think we probably need to take some steps back. So if we're saying, okay, we've got an athlete, let's say they're training for a marathon. So very, very common. I want to do my first marathon. I'm coming to you, Jeff, and I'm going, okay, I've got one training session a day. I'm busy. That's all I can do. I can fit in one training session. During the week, I could get in maybe up to an hour. On the weekends, I'll get a couple long runs. Is it okay for that person who's just training once a day? You're saying, hey, if you only got an hour in the morning, you can wake up, you can do that training session fasted, and then you'll be okay?
Yes. Put simply, yes. And if they wanted to take some carb during, whether it's a sports drink or maybe a gel, like 30 minutes or they're fasted, but then have a kind of delayed carb intake, that's not a bad idea if they want to. So yeah, you have a little flexibility there.
So within this research, Jeff, then you looked at, say, fats, protein, and carbs as pre-workout fuels. Were you assessing, say, okay, if say for a health standpoint, we've established with the fat oxidation, maybe it doesn't make any difference to your fat burning or greater fat loss. Is there any performance outcomes that are difference between, say, having this fat protein foods beforehand, these carbs foods beforehand? Was there any differences in performance outcomes?
Not over time, I don't know. Again, that's the study that got kind of interrupted. It would really answer that. It's unclear. Some people say, yeah, like they in practice, anecdotally, they see it improvements over time of long-term doing this. Yeah, it's not abundantly clear, say that one way or the other. So I think, yeah, I wish there was just a crystal clear answer. I think it's something where if you do some sessions fasted and some, now the one thing with your example marathoner, during the race, we presumably be taking in, appropriate amount of carbohydrate. They certainly need to train that. So I would think at least once a week, they should be training as they get into these longer runs closer to kind of the race distance. Maybe anything over 90 minutes definitely should be practicing the race fueling, so that, let's say, once a week, they're actually practicing, the similar race intake in terms of the type of products and the amount and all that. So there might be, these weekday runs where they can do it fasted, and there may be like an hour easy or some intervals, but then at least once a week, they're practicing that higher carb fueling, both from a logistical standpoint, from a comfort standpoint, and a gut training standpoint. So I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, and that's brings us on to this next point, Jeff. Say that marathoner that's training, maybe during the week they only get their hour-long sessions in, but say they get a 2, 3, maybe 4-hour run in on the weekend. How does this change if we've got supply for 75 minutes or so, and you're saying, hey, if you've got a session less than 75 minutes, you got enough in the tank there, you can get through. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. What happens if we've got the 2-hour, 3-hour? What happens to this fat oxidation, all the energy that we're using, our glycogen stores? What's going on in that system when we're talking about this longer duration exercise?
Yeah. So what people, the muscle glycogen will kind of get depleted regardless of how much carb you're taking in. It's the liver glycogen that carbs during exercise really can preserve. And when that gets low, its job is to keep our blood sugar from dropping. That bonk feeling is likely related to this, like a drop or a running out of your liver's gas tank. And that's so fueling during exercise. So in this 2-hour run, let's say, and someone's taking gels every 30 minutes or whatever, that's going to help preserve liver glycogen and or provide more carbs, exogenous carbohydrate to burn directly. That again lets you get to the end of the race or end of the training session without getting to the end of your liver's gas tank.
Can you expand on that a little bit, just for the guys that don't know, just the difference between our storage in liver glycogen and muscle glycogen?
Yeah. So those are our two. We store carbohydrate as glycogen basically in two main places, in our muscles and our liver. Our liver, and this is one of the reasons why fasted training kind of works is our muscles glycogen only depletes during exercise. So meaning if you go to sleep with your gas tank, 3/4 full, and you wake up in the morning, it's basically in the same, your muscles gas tank is in essentially the same place as it was when you went to sleep. Now, your liver, its job, among other things, is to keep your glucose from dropping overnight. So your liver glucose, your liver gas tank will, I should say liver glycogen, will drop by, let's say, 40% or so overnight from dinner until the next morning. And so this is kind of the limiting factor in these morning workouts, and which is why delaying carbohydrates. So if you had a gel, let's say 30 minutes in, if you really wanted to, that can help kind of maintain that. And so during exercise, we burn our muscle glycogen. We burn, again, the fat floating around from inside our muscles and also from the free fatty acids that come out of our adipose tissue. We have glucose coming from our liver that gets put out into our blood, which can then get burned by our muscles. And then we also have the glucose like from our gels or sports drinks. So there's a bunch of different sources of energy, and the kind of the reliance on one over the other shifts over time. So initially during exercise, it's our muscle glycogen and our muscle triglycerides, and then gradually, it's not an on-off switch, but gradually this focus, the thing providing the energy shifts towards the free fatty acids from around the body. And again, the glucose that's put out from your liver and from the exogenous, meaning the outside, like the gels and sports drinks.
Is that why, Jeff, when we're saying, okay, if you've got a 75-minute session, even if it is high intensity, you'll be able to get through it because initially we're using this stored carbohydrate, this stored energy that's in our muscle, and you're saying, hey, you've got plenty in there to get through 75 minutes worth of high intensity training, even if you're going really hard.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, it depends on how low, if you purposely have lower glycogen from, let's say, a workout the night before or something, that can change things. But if we're just talking about like kind of normal, training once a day and eating a mixed diet, then yeah, you should have enough in the system.
And again, very rough. You and I work with athletes, all different shapes and sizes, who have different storage tanks. But let's just say for the average athlete listening, how much glycogen are they storing in that muscle? And how much food would they have to be eating, say, the day prior? If I'm doing a high intensity session the next morning, I don't want to have breakfast. Maybe I'll just load up the day before. How much am I meant to be eating?
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to go crazy. I mean, if we think about carb loading, like to go from like a very low tank to like a fully maximal tank of gas, it could be this 10 to 12 grams per kilogram, but that's the extreme. But if we think of, let's say 10 grams per kilogram will more or less fill us up, little, not quite, but, and then if it depends on where you're starting. So it depends on what you've done the day before. Your body's going to kind of naturally refill itself just from having your diet. So to some degree, it depends. But if you're doing that hard workout, let's say tomorrow morning, that means you probably haven't done anything too hard the day before, in most people's training. So you're probably at least kind of a moderate level of glycogen. So long story short, I don't think you have to go too crazy. Maybe you just include some carbohydrate at dinner. Just having something, if we just want to have something to prevent bulking during a 60 to 75 minute workout, probably an extra, 1 or 2 grams per kilogram would be fine.
Yeah. Is there a number in total grams that you're confident saying maybe it's 200 grams per day, 300 grams, 400 is a number that you can say, if you have that, look, you're pretty much well covered?
I'd be reluctant to say that, but probably, if you're, again, if we're thinking about the marathoner training 1 hour a day, roughly, then probably this, like, again, depends on their body size, but, 3 to 5 grams per kilogram.
3 to 5.
Probably, reasonable.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now let's talk about that. So that person wakes up, Jeff, they're doing this high intensity session. I think this is worth going over because it's something that a lot of people don't quite understand, right? So you're saying when you start that exercise, first thing that you're going to be tapping into, your body's going, I need some store. We're running on this treadmill, running up this hill, doing this fartlek, whatever we're doing, we're looking at taking this muscle glycogen first. Then we're going to be looking in and we're going to be using some fatty acids that are also in the muscle. But then after that, we're going to be coming outside and we're going to be looking to, say, liver glycogen and blood glucose. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's not like one than the other, but the prevailing systems. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to think of it.
Yeah. And so let's just say 3 to 5 grams per kilogram the day before, you've got enough muscle glycogen. And you mentioned this term before, bonking. And if you guys listening haven't heard of this, another word for this is hitting the wall. And if you haven't hit the wall before, you definitely will know if you have, because it's the worst feeling in the world. It's absolutely horrible. It can turn a great day into the worst day on planet Earth, and you don't want to do nothing but just sit down and cry. Can you explain that a bit more, Jeff? Because you mentioned that that is when that liver glycogen's coming down. So it's when we've gone through most of that muscle glycogen, use some other store, and then we start tapping into that. That's when this hitting the wall will just slap us in the face. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, essentially, if your body is out of carbohydrates, either external ones, exogenous ones, or your internal stores, yeah, there's a point at which you just kind of can't go anymore. But the crazy thing, and this is, I don't know too much about this, how these brain interactions are, but as soon as you have like a sip of Coke or a little bit of a gel, you feel better like that. And of course, it's not absorbed that quickly. It's not going through your GI tract and being absorbed to your muscles. So there is a relationship, and this is why the carbohydrate mouth rinsing kind of is a thing. There's definitely a connection between your oral receptors and your brain. Again, it's not something I've kind of looked into too much, but anyone who's bonked and then has like again this smallest sip of Gatorade or Coke or whatever, like you feel better instantly. So there's some interesting stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about delaying that bonking then. So what are some strategies if you've got this athlete and they are doing the 2 hour session, 3 hour session? What are some strategies that they can do so they're not hitting the wall, they're not bonking?
Yeah, I mean, appropriate fueling is it like you shouldn't really bonk, provided you haven't like lost your bottle or your food or something. I mean, if you're anywhere between, it depends how long the session is and your fitness level, but anywhere between 30 to 70 grams an hour is usually appropriate. And some of the pro cyclists are getting up to 120, 130 grams an hour of carbohydrate. But for most people in most situations, it's like kind of 30 an hour. 30 is like one gel or just a bit, a bottle of sports drink, and then some combination of gels and sports drinks or chews or whatever can usually get you through like most workouts, and it usually shouldn't be a problem.
Is there a number that you can put on that you would say like per hour, or have you looked into that or personally?
Yeah, I mean, again, it kind of depends on the intensity. If you're simulating your race, plan in terms of running, you might be in that 50 to 70 grams an hour range. So let's say maybe it's 2 gels or something like that an hour, or it doesn't have to be gels. It's just kind of an easy way to talk about it. And so that, for if you're doing a race, 10 to 15 miles or something like that, at race pace, maybe you want to kind of practice your race fueling. So yeah, that should be fine. If you're doing an easy jog, a long, easy one, that you should be able to get away with lower. Now, what I find in practice is a lot of people, just because you can get by on either nothing or maybe just one gel, like let's say you're doing a 2 hour, really low intensity, below marathon pace run, just because you can get by on 0 or 1 gel total doesn't mean you should, because again, it's part of it is practicing fueling while you're running. For sticking with running example, just kind of getting your body accustomed to eating and running, chewing, those kind of things. So I think there's a degree of logistical practice that's important as well.
Can you talk to us about that, Jeff? Because I'm sure you've dealt with it, and we've dealt with it a lot, where a lot of the consensus, I think lately, especially endurance athletes, they're a lot less carb phobic than what they used to be, and they're very much more accepting. Yeah. However, there's still the more ketogenic, the carnivore athletes that are very adamant that, hey, you know what, I don't need carbohydrates to get through this 100-kilometer, 100-mile race. I can absolutely do it. And I've worked with them. I've raced against them. I've trained with them. They do get through it. Can you explain how that's happening then, Jeff, if we're saying, hey, you probably do need some carbohydrates? How are these guys getting through these races if they're not ingesting any?
Yeah, I mean, like you can, because like those systems we talked about before, I mean, the machinery gets upregulated based on training and what we feed it. So meaning if you have a low carb, high fat diet, the enzymes that break down or that burn fat get cranked up, and the carb burning enzymes get cranked down. And so your body is remarkably adaptable. So you can, and the longer you do those, say low carb diets or high fat, and couple that with the training, yeah, your body can adjust and it's fine. Like in terms of you can get through it. Even I think most low carb athletes tend to have some gels. So even if it's a 30 to 50 grams an hour, like kind of the lower side of carb intake during exercise, it tends to be helpful. Yeah, I mean so think it comes down to just because you can, it doesn't mean you should.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more? And I guess it's integrating these energy systems back. And what do you mean by low carb enzymes and high fat enzymes,
So
Jeff?
yeah. So to burn, let's say fat, we just think of this system as fat goes in and out comes energy. But there's a whole bunch of things, chemical processes that need to happen. When we talked about that wheel analogy before, there's a lot of enzymes that make the chemical reactions occur. Some are kind of in the fat burning machinery. Some are in the carb burning machinery. Some are, there's enzymes all over our body. But the amount of I guess if you think about like a factory and there's machines, and then you have some workers on the fat burning machines and some workers on the carb burning machines. And if there's no business coming into the carb burning machines, I mean, they're going to lay off workers. And if there's a ton of business in the fat burning machines, they're going to hire more workers. And so these machines can kind of turn over, and so that's basically what happens in our body. It doesn't want to waste resources on things it's not using. And so, over time, and this can happen very quickly, even in 5 days of a low carb, high fat diet, you can shift the kind of the staff, if you will. And what we feed it sets up the machinery, and then the machinery is how we make energy. And so that's then shows up in, during exercise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess if we're kind of trying to bring this all together then, so we've got this environment where our body's got these three energy systems. We've got the ATP, PCR, which is really fast. So say if we're doing really, really fast sprints out of the blocks initially, jumping up and down really fast, we've got this glycolytic, which is dependent on this glucose and operates without oxygen, very, very high intensity. And then we've got the aerobic, which is our longer duration, slower energy systems. But within those energy systems, they're being fueled predominantly by carbohydrates and fats, but the ratios at which we're using fats as energy and carbohydrates as energy are going to depend on a lot of different things. And what we're saying here is that can be manipulated with your diet. And that's definitely the research that you've shown. And what you're eating before your workout will manipulate how you use energy to fuel those energy systems. What you're eating during your exercise is going to manipulate what you're doing. Is that correct? Is that where we're at right now, Jeff?
I think that's a good summary. Just a small, I guess, distinction is the enzymes and things. Those are slightly longer term changes, so that might need a week of a low carb or high fat diet. What we're talking about in terms of the pre-exercise meal is just affecting the kind of the hormonal environment. So insulin, for example. So carbohydrate increases insulin, that kind of shuts down the fat burning system and shifts the focus there. So it's just small nuance in terms of the during and the before and during food changes things just in terms of the environment, whereas the slightly longer term food intake changes kind of the machinery.
So I guess what we could say, Jeff, then is that there's a few different opportunities that we can use our nutrition here to adjust and change this system to get these different energetic pathways, or how our body uses fuel differently. And I guess what you're saying right now is, and I wish you were able to finish that study, is that right now we're not quite sure. We're not sure, hey, if you do this and you eat this particular way, you're going to get upregulated with more fat. We don't quite know if that has more performance benefits, or hey, if you do this and you eat more carbs and you give more pay to the carb enzymes and you get more of them, we get a better performance. Or is there a position that you're in, maybe let's talk about research, Jeff, and practitioner, Jeff, where if you've got an athlete coming to you and I'm saying, hey, Jeff, I want to run the best marathon time I can, is there opportunities that you would say, hey, Geordie, do these, and I think that's going to set you up best to get that marathon time?
Yeah, maybe that's a good segue into some of the training load stuff, because I guess, if we think about, I guess what you're asking is, how can we best use nutrition to get the most out of training?
Yes.
Is that right? And so I think, it's pulling up, looking for something, a note I had here. Like if, let's say you're working with an athlete, I mean, what are the goals from a nutrition standpoint? I mean, we want robust health. We want healthy athletes, right? Mm-hmm. We want to support their training goals and want them to bring their best on race day. So that just kind of from a big picture, right? If we're focusing on training goals, which it sounds like we are right now, to me, the goal of nutrition is to like I just said, support training goals, meaning allow them to complete the appropriate training. So I really see nutrition as being more foundational to achieving, well, high or appropriate training loads, as opposed to saying, oh, this pre-exercise meal, this one is gonna, you know, we're tweaking the enzymes. I think it's more about the training, and the nutrition is there to support the training, meaning let the athletes complete all the training that's, prescribed every day, feeling good or, as appropriate, not getting sick, basically just kind of like I said, supporting. If you think about even a recreational athlete, I mean, from the beginning of a training block to the race day, they might have, I don't know, 10% improvements or 15%, like some major improvements in terms of like your 5Ks time or whatever, like even in a 10-week or 12-week training block. The effect of nutrition is going to be much smaller than that on an acute basis. But when nutrition can help support that long-term training, that is where I think actually the kind of the money is. So it's a little bit more not obscure. It's harder to kind of point your finger on, than these. It's great to think about these things that we've been talking about, and I don't discount that it is something. But if we want to say, how does the athlete get the most from how does nutrition contribute to the athlete getting the most out of their training and bringing their best on race day? I think it's really about allowing them to do the training, which means not bonking, not again recovering appropriately. Now, all the things that go in hand with what we're talking about. But I just think the emphasis is, instead of going, oh, should they do it fasted or fed to get the best adaptation? I think it's actually more about the bigger context of what they're doing.
So would you say then, Jeff, is this a fair statement to make that training is the most important part and then nutrition is just supporting the training?
Yes, absolutely.
So an analogy I often use, Jeff, you're a cyclist, I'm an ultra endurance runner. And is this correct in saying, say if Jeff, you invite me over to Auckland, I come over and you say, let's go for a 30-kilometer bike ride and let's have a race and see who races the best. You go into that ride fasted. I eat the perfect diet. I'm going to carb load into it. I'm going to have 10 grams per kilogram. Going into it, I'm going to eat the healthiest diet ever. You and I toe this start line. I would bet my bottom dollar, Jeff, that you're absolutely going to smash me in that race because I haven't been on a bike in years and years, and I'd probably fall off the second I get on it. Is that saying then that all the adaptations that we often talk about when we're doing these really minute and really niche things, okay, do we eat protein, fat, and we get these fastings? Do we upregulate these enzymes? Do we do that? Is that kind of down the track when we've got this big training piece down pat where we say, hey, you know what, Geordie? You're not going to beat Jeff in this race because Jeff's got years and years of training on you. How about we come back to fundamentals here and we just get you training every single day for 5 days. We get your recovery on point. We get a good 8-week block. We get there. And then maybe down the track, we'll think about you racing and competing and we'll talk about these things.
Yeah, I think that's, that's a reasonable, I think that makes sense. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean then, again, and now as a segue into understanding the athlete's training, I do think, this concept of fueling for the work required gets used a lot. I think that's really critical. So, I guess it's, now a second half of this conversation is like, okay, how are you supporting the training goals? Well, if someone has a 3 or 4 hour bike ride, they need a good amount of carbs. Again, it tends to depend on all that beforehand. And we don't want them to bonk. And if they're just doing a 40-minute recovery ride, then they don't need a lot. And so their day-to-day nutrition can and should change quite a lot. If they're doing a hard workout, a twice a day workout, or a hard evening workout, and then, basically, let's say a Monday night, they have some sprints, and then like Tuesday morning is a hard aerobic workout, and then when Tuesday afternoon is in the gym session, and now thinking to more of the elite athletes I work with, there needs to be a real focus on fueling appropriately through those, that 36-hour period, and that might be quite high in carbohydrate. So it's more about, again, supporting fueling, well, again, for the work required. That's really a appropriate phrase. So it does matter. It's just that it needs to matter in the context of what's happening.
So we can break that up into 3 different phases, I guess. The approach you would take, Jeff, is that there's the everyday health, which would probably be your daily diet. Make sure that's good and getting enough calories in so you can actually turn up to the training, be healthy and be able to get through that, and you're not getting sick running off to the doctors. There's fueling for the training, which we'll dive into a lot because I agree with you. The fuel for the work required approach is great. Not so, bit too ambiguous when we get into the the nitty gritty of practice. And then it's okay, if you've got the specific race, say you've got a 100-kilometer run or you've got a 200-kilometer bike ride, we need to have race specific strategies to help you get through that. So if
Yep.
we can go back to this training then, and we can establish, okay, there's all these energy systems, there's probably things that you can, adaptations that will help you, and training is going to probably give us the most bang for buck. And you getting to training every single day, largely, if you have a good daily diet, you're eating good food, you've got good calories, you can get to that training. But then we're going, okay, we've got these higher intensity sessions, lower intensity, we've got these long sessions, we've got these short sessions. I've probably got to eat a little different between these sessions. Like you said, the fuel for the work required. Absolutely love it. Love that concept from Liverpool, John Moores. Love the work that those guys do. But you know just as well as I do, Jeff, when it comes to this session, if I've got a 2-hour tempo session compared to, say, a 4-hour race pace run, very, very different in how you're going to fuel it, very different in the energy. And we quite often just break this down into, hey, this is a high session, this is a moderate and a low. And us as practitioners are often left there going, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Can you talk to us about your research into this? And okay, how do we actually determine what we do with these high, moderate, and low sessions?
Yeah, no, that's spot on. Like that key paper that those guys wrote, led by Sam and P, and they give that template of high, medium, and low, like you said. And I actually, from a practitioner standpoint, like in my head, it's kind of clear. Let's say for an athlete, and I can give them high, medium, and low, and to me that makes sense. But what I realized was all of a sudden, what's high? How high is high, and how low is low? And to some people, a high carb day is like adding a banana, and some people it's like 4 plates of pasta. And so, kind of understanding those needs better was kind of where my next kind of that post PhD research started to focus on. And so if we know someone's training load, and we can use any metric, let's say TSS if you use Training Peaks, or can we use this training load to kind of adjust their carbohydrate intake based on their planned or kind of recorded training load.
Excellent. And what did you find when you went through this? Because this is very interesting. I'm just going to wind it back to something that you said earlier too, Jeff, is that if we're talking about, okay, we've got this specific training here, how many calories is that particular person burning an hour? How many carbs is that particular person? Like you said, that's going to change if this person's a big person, small person. The intensity will change based on their fitness. So even if you say, okay, we're both doing this same session, I might be burning way more or way less than what you are. And there should be a system that we can determine, okay, well, what is that? Can you talk to us about how you're trying to figure out what that system is?
Yeah. So basically, I wondered just that. And I thought, well, okay, if I have these training load measures coming daily or, from these athletes, can I connect that to their carbohydrate use or calorie use in some way? And if you don't know, like, let's just take TSS as the example. And again, if many people might know what that is, but basically it's training stress score. A score of 100 would be equivalent to your hardest hour. So if you did an hour as hard as you could, that should equate to a TSS of 100. And then it kind of scales up and down. And there's a formula you can look at, but just, think of it as, how long and how hard your workout was. Me and a professional cyclist can both have same TSS, and be burning a completely different amount of calories. So 500 to 2,000 calories difference or something per hour, let's say. So can you still use TSS to get an estimate of the calorie expenditure? And I thought, well, you could if you knew someone's like VO2 max or their FTP or their anaerobic threshold, things like that. So I basically set up a lab study to kind of figure out just that. And then can you model? So can I take a new athlete, Jordan, can I take your TSS? And if I know your VO2 max and a couple of the little things, duration of the workout and things, can I estimate how many carbs or calories you burned during that workout? And that's the paper that, we published a few months ago.
Yeah, excellent. Can you talk us through? And what did you find?
Yeah, of course. Basically it was set up. It started with 15 cyclists that did 4 different training sessions in the lab. So I measured their carbohydrate and energy expenditure using lactate and mass, basically measuring those systems we talked about earlier. And then I had the training load metrics for each of those sessions. And so briefly, it was a 30-minute easy session, a 90-minute easy session, and then 2 different types of interval sessions. So when I had these 4 sessions for each person, and we had the calories burned and the carb use and the training load measures, then we made these models to say, can we estimate the carb use based on training load plus, like I said, VO2 max or PT2 or these thresholds, a few pieces of relatively easily available information, non-invasive things. And then we tested these models in a new set of cyclists, runners, and kayakers. And basically, they with with a few little adjustments, I mean, and some calculations, you can apply these models in cycling, running, and kayaking to get a reasonable estimate of basically someone's calorie and carb burn if you just know their VO2 max and their training load, and like I said, a couple of these easily available things.
Excellent, excellent. And it's right now, Jeff, it's cycling, running, and kayaking. That's where you've focused mostly in this research.
Yeah. And so I think it's expandable. This approach is expandable to literally any sport, including combat sports. You just need kind of a consistent training load metric. Cycling and running and it's kind of the easiest, and I work in kayaking, and also kayaking is just as easy. You have a lab, kind of think of like a rowing machine, but for kayak. So those things are kind of easily measurable in the lab.
So what you're saying, Jeff, are you saying that within these sports that you looked at in this research paper, you took these equations and using this data, the VO2 max data and everything else you collected, if you had a training score, say TSS or something, and there's plenty of these that people listening at home can use for themselves, they could plug their numbers into these equations and they'll get both the calories that they burn and the carbs that they'll use in the session?
Yes. Yeah, you get an estimate of those, and like I said, it's a pretty reasonable estimate. I did make a couple of videos about how to do that because I didn't make a calculator that someone can use, but I did kind of walk you through the directions. And I mean, the one caveat is probably like the session should be between about 30 and 90 minutes. These longer sessions, a 4-hour bike ride, you can't. There's some adjustments that I've been working on, but basically you can't. It won't really work for these super long sessions because the ones we did in the lab were just these 30 to 90 minutes. And like we said, your carbohydrate use changes. So your relative carbohydrate use declines. So if you're riding at even a set pace for 4 hours, the first 90 minutes I can get a pretty good estimate, but then your carb use is going to decline gradually over that time. And those models don't really account for those long durations yet.
Would you say that these are better than, say, using a smartwatch or a band or a heart rate monitor that many athletes are using?
I hope so. I think so. I think those things probably, if you're the average person, then it probably is okay. But like I said, there's 1 hour at a heart rate of 150, even at the same body weight, 70 kilograms and a heart rate of 150 for an hour. Like that could be like 300 or 400 calories for some people, and like literally like 1,200 calories for other people. So depending on the watch and the things, like it can be closer or not so close.
Yeah, excellent. And when you took these models, did you apply these to athletes and then look at that in terms of the fuel for the work required or the periodization, and then assess, hey, are they actually periodizing to what their needs are? Are they eating the carbs that reflect the results that are coming from these equations?
Yeah, I mean that not in that research part. I mean that research study ended with kind of like checking it in the new set of athletes. But yeah, then from a practical perspective, and this is where I think it's really useful, is to kind of, you can have essentially a rolling energy and carbohydrate expenditure estimation like every day for someone. And then that can inform their fueling choices. So I do kind of use that, in some ways to say, okay, your breakfast is, TSS times, whatever, 0.85, and that's how many carbs you should have at breakfast, or something like that.
Yeah. Let's just go back to Jeff, you smashing me in a cycling race. I get really annoyed about it, and I go, you know what? I'm gonna get him. I'm gonna give 6 months of hard training, and I'm gonna get him. I'm gonna do everything that Jeff's just said here. Jeff, you wrote me a great diet. I'm eating really well during the day. If I want to do this fuel for the work required, so say you wrote me a training plan as well and said, this is how you can compete with me, and then I've got these 6 to 8 sessions a week, and I go, yeah, I want to fuel these properly. How would I take that information using those equations, and how would I set it up in a spreadsheet to know if I am fueling for the work required for each of those training sessions?
I don't think you would take that many weeks to catch up to me, so that's one. But that's where, well, I guess working a few options. One is working with someone like on your team or me is an option. Hexus is an app that Sam Impey, one of the guys from it's really kind of the Fuel for the Work Required original research, is a co-founder of that app, and they do an excellent job of kind of taking your training and kind of adjusting, essentially doing that for you. If with some knowledge, you can do it on your own. But I think for like an athlete that just wants to apply these principles, I think it's not impossible to just do on your own. But I think, I mean, it's like we all spend a lot of time thinking about and learning about this stuff to be able to kind of make sensible choices in terms of making plans. So, yeah, I mean, you theoretically could just figure out your burn for each workout, and then you'd have to, consider your resting needs. Like if you, I don't know, had an off day, and you'd want to consider the last workout and the next workout, and then what you have coming up after that as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of consideration to it. It's certainly possible, but I guess this depends how deep your knowledge is and how much you want to do on it.
And do you apply this with your athletes that you do work with?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and initially it was, I just thought people would all get the high, medium, and low carb meal. And then when I realized they kind of need numbers to go along with that. So what I do, I mean, not for everyone, of course, but for some of my like Olympic athletes there, I'll get the training plan in advance, get an estimate of the TSS for every workout for, let's say, the coming week or the coming training block, and then use kind of a combination of rule-based logic and some of the calculations that of expected burn from these sessions to then spit out a number for each meal, a carbohydrate target for each meal, which again considers what they just done and what they have coming up.
And let's just talk purely from your practice with your athletes, Jeff. And if you need to be general, that's okay. Have you found that there's trends where there is a huge variance between individuals where, say, Sally has to have, say, 90 grams of carbohydrates to support her 2-hour long session, where Susie only has to have about 60 grams? Is it pretty individual in that sense? Or are there some sweeping statements where, hey, you know what, if this person is this size and is doing 2 hours, generally most of these guys need X grams of carbohydrates to get through? Or do you find, no, it is actually very individual?
Yeah, I think it's pretty individual, but within a person. So if I have, let's say, 5 athletes in a squad doing the similar training, the moderate meal for one person might be 0.8 times grams per kilogram times body weight. Another person might be 0.9. Another person might be 0.95 or 1. Same thing, a high carb meal might be 0.95 for one and 1.2 for another. So where those high, medium, and low carb meals sit really can vary for people. And that just gets kind of honed over time, and then it can kind of gradually just get refined. And so every week when I make a new plan, that for that person, it kind of stays. It's the high, medium, low carb meals might be similar across athletes, but then the precise amount is based on both their body weight, and then there's that kind of preference of higher, slightly higher or lower on that spectrum.
Yeah. And again, coming back to your analogy with the factory and the low carb enzymes, high fat enzymes, the high carb enzymes, the goal, and correct me if I'm wrong, by doing this and figuring out, okay, this is how many carbs you're actually burning in this session, we need to figure out if it's high, medium, or low, is because you want to give the right resources to the workers that are doing the work in the factory for that activity. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and another thing about that Feel for the Work Required paper that really lays out well is this framework. So again, thinking about our gas tank, our glycogen gas tank, you want to end your workout with about a third of a tank. So if you end your workout too low, like completely depleted, that's not ideal from an adaptation standpoint. So now this is getting back to the adaptations too, how we're supporting the adaptations. And I guess I kind of skipped over this before, but it is critical. If you if you carb load for like an easy training session, you will probably not get the most out of that training session. So if you end your workout with 95% a gas tank full, like if you start at 100% full and you end the workout at 90% full, you're not going to get the adaptation you want from that workout. So you want to have the right amount in the tank so that it's where you end. It's really where you end that matters, not where you start. But all this, what we're doing here, and again, I should have been clearer about this earlier, you're starting so that you end in the right place. So we're adjusting the start position so that you end with, again, let's just call it a third of a tank. There's a little bit of, window room, a window for opportunity, but yeah, so you don't want to end too low. You won't complete the workout effectively. You don't want to end too high. You won't get the adaptations you want. And so you want to start with enough in the tank. So you have to know how much, is it going to be 4 hours of like kind of mixed intensity and a pretty hard workout? Well, then, yeah, you want to start pretty high because you're going to end quite low. If it's a 60-minute easy one, well, you're not going to burn that much. So you can start low to moderate, and then so you just go down a little bit.
And when we're talking about 1/3 of a tank, out of all the options we spoke about earlier, which tank are we talking about?
Oh, sorry, muscle glycogen.
So muscle glycogen, which is the first thing that we're initially going to start burning
Yeah,
when we do this exercise, and how much we burn is just going to be determined by the intensity and the duration.
exactly.
So is that saying then, Jeff, hey, you know what? If I've got a morning session and it's high intensity, is it then favorable to maybe I don't want to have as big a meal the night before because I want to finish on 1/3 of a tank? So maybe I do want to deplete that. Can you explain? And I'm sure, like you said, there's probably a window here. Let's use 1/3 of a tank. What is the benefit of finishing on that? And is that a viable strategy? Should I ease up on dinner the night before to get there?
Well, even if you have kind of a moderate dinner, let's say in this example of someone on a normal diet, you'll probably get there because the higher you start, the faster it'll burn actually. So it's not linear in terms of how fast you burn it. So if you're starting low, you're going to burn it more slowly. But if you're starting super high, it'll burn more quickly. So this kind of like this curve going on. With that said, yeah, if you start too low, you won't complete your workout or effectively. So there's this danger of going too low. And that's where the experience and practice and some of the kind of the quantifying the numbers really comes together. Yeah, you don't have to avoid carbs at dinner, but you don't need to go crazy. But if you're starting kind of medium and this is again honed over time with experience, then yeah, you want to come in like, do the work, yeah, come in basically with a little left in the tank, but not too much, not too little.
And what's the benefit? What's actually going on in the body
So the
where
signaling,
we finish
yes,
1/3 of a tank as opposed to a full tank?
yeah. So it seems that the signaling is better. So what that means, like, so we do exercise and we get better, right? But many people just leave it at that. But like our body's adapting, our cells are adapting. So there's like this whole unbelievable symphony of things happening. But the signals from the exercise, and that actually comes from the oxidative stress and from the low ATP, and there's different actually pathways of signaling. Some of it's just the contraction itself. That sends a signal, say, hey, let's make more mitochondria. Let's make more efficient and more number of mitochondria, which can make more energy. So this kind of the adaptation process itself gets signaled from these exercise signals. So it's thought that if glycogen is one of those signals, and if glycogen, let's say again, we end at 90% full, well, that signaling is not going to occur. Now, there's still other signaling, again, in terms of the contraction, or you also might hear about people say, don't take antioxidants around training, a high dose of vitamin C and vitamin E. Again, similar reason, that's going to blunt some of the signaling. So if we think about, I think roughly, let's just say 4 kind of signaling cascades. One is just the contraction itself. So it's this calcium signaling. So your muscle's actually just contracting. That's going to send a signal. Some reactive oxygen species, oxidative stress, that's going to send a signal. Low ATP, so the AMP or ADP to ATP ratio, that's going to activate something called AMP kinase or AMPK. That's going to send a signal. And then glycogen also via AMPK and other ways too can send a signal to say, hey, let's adapt, have some mitochondrial biogenesis and kind of get better, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So the goal then is with the training, you're doing the specific type of training to get a specific type of adaptation from there. And the goal is, if you are using nutrition, to make sure that your body can do that training to get that specific adaptation.
Yeah, so you're basically you want to make sure you have enough fuel that you can recover and do the training, not too much fuel that you kind of blunt the signaling, but not too little. And then you get into low energy availability and you're not going to recover. And so it's kind of so I guess at a moment of a few minutes ago, I kind of sound like I'm almost downplaying the importance of nutrition. I don't actually. It is important. It just kind of it's important for certain reasons.
Jeff, do you find this, because this is an important note, and I want to come back to it where we're talking about the interplay of training and nutrition. And I'm sure you've worked with lots of athletes, especially high performance athletes that are probably at a pretty high level when they come to meet you. And then you assess their diet and you go, oh, wow, like there's not a lot of thought or effort going in there. How much weight are we putting then and saying, okay, how much weight does nutrition play in this whole system if we're trying to get these adaptations as compared to training? Is there a way that we can quantify that, or a percentage that you're comfortable with saying?
That's a tricky one because I mean, there's just scales of grades of how how people are. What the biggest thing I find with people that eat generally good is that they might eat quite similar from day to day, but the training might change considerably from day to day. And so that's where a lot of times one of the biggest kind of benefits can come from. And an easy way to kind of spot this is if on easy days or recovery days, people are eating a ton of food. They're so hungry, kind of catching up from the other days. So if you find like on an easy day, you're really playing catch up, well, I think that's kind of a sign of underfueling on the bigger days. And some of it might be normal, but I think there's space, and athletes generally feel better and recover better when you're matching that a little bit more closely. So on these big training days, you're kind of just getting more in. And so because otherwise, if you ate the same every day, even if you worked out to the right amount of carbs or calories at the end of the week, that might mean you're in a 300 or 400 calories of carbohydrate surplus one day and that much of a deficit on other days. And, just hitting the average every day is better than not, but not ideal.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So it really comes back to these three points then, is that we go, your health, you need to be healthy enough to train. You need to be in a position where you can do the intensity and duration of the training. That's where your specific fueling strategy comes in. And it's not just fuel for the work required, it's understanding how much fuel you actually need to best get the signaling to get the adaptation from that training. And then the last piece, I guess, that we touched on earlier is, can you put that all together in the race? And when it comes to working at this intensity for this duration, can you put all the nutrition together to get to the finish line or whatever it is you're trying to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that last bit can look totally different for an Ironman athlete or an ultra runner that the in-race fueling is critical compared to, Olympic sports where the races might be 2 minutes long. And that then it's more about, the supplementation or the timing of things like that.
Yeah, excellent. Now, Jeff, there's lots more we could talk about, but that gives us a really, really good comprehensive overview. Two questions that I want to finish this episode on. I ask everyone that comes on. First question, what does performance mean to you, Jeff?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's tricky questions. I guess I guess I see it as achieving the desired outcomes, but you also need to consider just how effectively and how efficiently you work towards these goals or outcomes. So it's kind of getting what you want in the right way.
Yeah, excellent. And last one, and more personal about you and performance for your life, Jeff. What is high performance and what is performance for Jeff Rothschild?
Yeah, I mean, I'll borrow something I've heard from a colleague. Like basically, it's kicking ass at work and also kicking ass at home.
Yeah.
And frankly, not just not fucking around or wasting time. Like people just can tend to waste time and sometimes in life, and so just like just those two things.
That's awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. I know you're busy and I know you're doing a lot of great work. I've learned so much from reading your papers, watching your videos. We'll put all of the notes and all of your papers. We'll put your app, we'll put your website all in the show notes. Very last thing I need to ask, people are going to be listening to this and go, man, you guys are talking a lot. There's no way I can figure out all of that stuff and calories and carbs burnt. I need Jeff to do it for me. If that someone is listening, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I appreciate you having me. And I'll say that you've done a fantastic job. I think reining it in and summarizing a lot of the stuff we talked about. So well done. If someone wants to reach out, I have a website. It's eatsleep.fit. And so you can contact me through there or reach out that way.
Excellent. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on and I'll chat to you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.